This program is a presentation of UCTV for educational and non-commercial use only.
So I thought that what I would do is to bring a few things up from our collection. We've talked a bit about Darwin's fossil collecting in South America. Well, I thought you might like to see some South American fossils that are just like the ones that Darwin collected. This is a limb bone from a giant sloth that he collected. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff here, including a piece of an armored tail from a glyptodont, which is an ancient relative of the armadillo, a piece of another ancient South American critter with his teeth intact here in a part of his jaw. And these are all things just like the stuff that Darwin collected, and I thought maybe you might like to take a look at some of these sorts of things. Darwin didn't collect these, but they're collected from the same kinds of stuff that he found. And when he worked this stuff through, he took very great care to describe the geologic relations of the areas and to determine that although other people had said that the stuff before had been collected from older deposits, he was pretty sure they were Pleistocene. So, although he doesn't actually, come out and push it, but that's kind of an interesting thing about that. So a little bit more on this. The theme we've been having in part today is, what Darwin said, why he said it, what he meant when he said it. And so we've gone a bit through the old guy and sort of this stuff and this stuff. And one reason I said that Darwin didn't use the word evolution is that it actually meant something different in his day. It meant a kind of a gradual, stately unfolding, but more of something that was already preconceived. So, for example, the unrolling of a leaf or a fiddlehead fern, which was understood to be predetermined by these mysterious laws of the correlation of growth. This is what evolution, before Darwin, was commonly used to denote. And so he didn't use this. He tended to use the word transmutation, which was a change from one kind or another. It was actually people like Herbert Spencer who began to use evolution in more and more the idea that we would use it today. So that's just one reason why, when the last word of The Origin of Species is evolved, but the word doesn't appear anywhere else in the book, that's why. And these are things that we want to be sensitive to. Many of the things we found in the beagle with Fitzroy, all of the construction of the beagle, how careful, and Keith has talked about what an amazing scientist Fitzroy was and why these guys, when they're very careful, the earthquake at Chile. And this is the quote from Darwin's diary, which you do not find, by the way, in the published journal of the Beagle, Voyage of the Beagle. This is from his actual diary, where he says this. And so he means that by gradual, this is one meaning of the term. And so, as I mentioned before, he's not going to have a trouble with step-like evolution, although he would insist that the steps are small. Here is a word. This is an interesting word, and it kind of points up some of the difference and the importance of using words in two different senses, the way normal people use them and the way scientists use them. So when your kid says, "Oh, Dad, that's so random," have you all heard this? Except if you're kids, have you said this? Yes, good, thank you. And it has to be said with that particular inflection. "Oh, Dad, that's so random. Can you please repeat random?" You get the... Now, what does this mean to somebody in this? It means that something usually you said, came out of the blue. It was a non sequitur, had no relation to what's going on before, and is pretty weird. And that's what random as a concept means to an ordinary person, particularly in the last 15, 20 years with the advent of a particular kind of American dialect that we won't discuss further. But actually, scientists have a different view of this word. The internet is a wonderful place, as you know. You can find out all kinds of stuff. Anybody here from Riverside? I know some people from down south. Okay, well, you know, so you can find out stats like this on the net. And I was kind of intrigued by this because, you know, there's an incidence here of disaster. And if this is right, then the probability that your house will burn, all the things being equal, is that percentage. Okay, if the causes of fire were random. But we know the causes of fire are not random. In fact, we know there are three main causes of house fires. One is smoking in bed. Second is getting stoned and kicking over the lava lamp. The third is ex-wife gets the house, ex-husband comes back and tortures it. So, because we know this, we know that there are causes, and these are not random causes. If they were random, I mean, if we knew which house was going to burn in advance, we would not need to buy insurance. When I give this lecture in front of businessmen, it makes them nervous. So, the fact is, we can't predict everything in advance, and even though we have a good idea of how many fires will happen in a given municipality, and we even have a good idea of the risks, we don't know which individual houses will burn. And that's why we need a fire department, we need insurance, we need this kind of thing. And the distribution of those probabilistic outcomes, that is to say, whose house burns, how many houses burn in a given population, that is a statistical distribution. But that distribution to us is described as random because we can't individuate it. We can't bring it down to your house or the guy across the street or the guy down the block. And so this has nothing to do with cause and everything to do with effect. And not just effect, but distribution of effects. And that's what, to a scientist, the idea of random means. So what people don't understand about evolution, when we talk about randomness in evolution, we don't mean that the processes are random, per se. We don't mean that anything can happen. We don't mean there are any rules, there's no laws, that nothing is going on here. Even words like unguided are loaded because one thing we understand about evolution, which is why Darwin wrote his books on natural selection, sexual selection, and why we've had 150 years of research ever since, is because we are not just studying random events and processes. These are not random processes. They are very strong selective processes. One way to figure this out, like I asked my Cal students, were you admitted by selection, or are you here at random? Some of them have to think. But this is what we mean. And everything that we've studied about, we know there are interesting random processes in evolution, such as genetic drift and so on, but these are generally explicable in statistical terms. We're talking about causes. Most of the time, we're not really talking about random processes. Oh, there are a few. So this is one problem. Darwin's view, he was not interested in first cause. Those divine things were the stuff of theology. And as Keith has said, he wasn't really very interested in theology. He didn't have any objection to it, but it just wasn't much of what he could really work with. So if you agree with him, you're probably a Darwinian. And that surprises many Americans because they don't think that this is what Darwin thinks. They think that Darwin is an atheist, a materialist who just thinks that natural selection and randomness is just unguided and evolution proceeds by random factors, which couldn't be farther from what he was talking about. This is his statement in his autobiography about organized religion. And he writes this while he's fairly young. So So although he dismisses organized religion, he has more nuanced views about religion itself and theology. So here is the old guy again, who by the end of his life is really not interested in these questions anymore. But what does he think about the struggle for nature? In nature, one of the things, and I think, although this is very Victorian purple prose passage, it should be read straight. He needs his audience to understand this. This is not a moral, ethical war. There is no evil in nature. The lion is not evil for taking down the impala. It's just not relevant. It's not there. Now, he does not extend these views to humans. For humans, he has a completely different ethic. But this is what he thinks about the incessant war of nature. And that term, by the way, he gets from de Candolle, Frenchman, the war of nature, seeing these things as a kind of eternal battle. But he also sees a balance in nature, that tangled bank stuff that he's always talking about. And so it's really kind of distressing to see so many modern people who should know better, including clerics like this one, who has a very strong connection to the Vatican, and to write statements like this clearly in a very derogatory mode. Cardinal Schönbrunn's scripts are plotted for him by the Discovery Institute in Seattle, which is our main purveyor of intelligent design. And I think it's important to understand that although we don't agree, everybody, there isn't a single definition of evolution. Some are better than others, but this is not one of them. There are elements in this that might appear in a definition of evolution, but it doesn't really work this way because there are some code words here that kind of get the issue confused. Well, what do we know about this? You've probably seen these Gallup polls. Are these familiar to you? You've seen this stuff before? It hasn't changed much over, as you can see, well, there's even more recent polls than that. So over more than 20, 25 years, we're getting about the same numbers here. These are the choices that are given to people by the Gallup poll. They've used the same questions for a very long time. And so you've got people, humans evolved with God guiding, God had no part. That would be the more or less atheistic perspective. Humans in their present form, which may lead you to think that these are the people who think that the Flintstones is a documentary. But it's actually, it's a lot more subtle than this. And there are a great many people from all religions who would pick this answer because many people think, and they don't, 10,000, 50, when did humans evolve? Who really keeps the zeros straight? But when they did, if God breathed a soul into humankind, that would count and that would be the best answer. And you don't have to be a fundamentalist or on the other hand, someone who would be completely ignorant to accept this. So it's very, very confusing. And these are people who just wanted to watch TV or not. Whatever. So, random. So they, these are the answers given. Not many people know that George Gallup, who is the father of this whole operation, is an evangelical Christian who thinks that his polling operation is his mission from God on earth to find out God's will for his people. I am not making this up. He has said so. It's been in interviews. And that doesn't mean that all his questions are bad, but it means we ought to think about where this is coming from. What's interesting is that a different poll taken by some other people on another part of the American political spectrum found out that if they asked this question, they got that answer in the proportion of people. That's a really different result. And so here's the deal. A third of us have a problem. Who in our country has a problem with evolution and religion together? There are two groups of people, really. One of them, clearly, also that when they're asked questions, they give this kind of answer about other related questions, or those that are sort of social, politically related to this. So here's a number here. Is that coincidence, or is it correlation, or is it just what's going on here? I should mention that people who do not accept evolution would take up about 25% of that at least, but we also have a number of people who are atheists who do not think religion is compatible with anything. And so they would be another percentage, and that might just about add up to this. Now, I don't know whether that's really what the association is, but you can come at these questions, no matter how a question is asked, you can get weird answers for different reasons. But this really tells us something about the character of American life. As Jeannie Scott and her co-author pointed out in Science, if you look at the percentage of people who accept evolution among developed countries, and out of about 30-something developed countries, the U.S. is next to last. The last is Turkey. And the difference is that we both have a very strong percentage of fundamentalists. Ours are Christian, theirs are Muslim. That's the main difference. So we are constantly dealing in this country with the question of challenges to evolution and how we should work with this. Now, should we teach intelligent design, something you all know about, which reared its head in the late 1990s as a very media-friendly approach to can't we all just get along? This guy is a national treasure. What's the principle behind intelligent design as it crops up today? The intelligent design folks don't seem to have a problem with most of science, but they think that some things are so complex it would be really hard to assemble them. Oddly enough, all these things are biological, and they involve evolution. Who would have thought? So that's a problem, and therefore, that's an indication for us that there must be some kind of supernatural deal going on here that is interfering with this. There are two, actually boils down to one, but it's okay. You guys probably know a lot about this. I'm going to go very quickly, but the idea of irreducible complexity is that there's so many working parts, you can't put them together all at once. They can't assemble piece by piece, so they must have been assembled all at once by some force that's not natural. And that, they say, is therefore the sign of a creator. And Mike Behe at Lehigh is a proponent of this. He talked a lot about the bacterial flagellum. There's a lot of parts to it. If you take any part, it's not going to work. This is not true. Ken Miller, one of our colleagues at Brown, who has made a particular effort to debunk this, along with our own Nick Matsky from our department, formerly at NCSE, have worked on this, and just there's lots of things you could do. Simply, there are lots of other critters around with way less complex flagella, and they do just fine, thank you. If you take away enough parts, it stops working as a flagellum and starts becoming part of the T2 secretory system. But it's all right. This is a problem, is that Behe and these guys won't accept secondary adaptation or exaptation, two different processes. The idea that you actually can use something for one function and then start using it for something else and then maybe transfer a lot more concentration on that. But that's a problem. This is a very important central function, a central idea in evolution. Darwin understood this, and we look at it as one of our major cornerstone processes today in the field of macroevolution. And yet, when during the Dover intelligent design trial, our lawyer on our side, Eric Rothschild, questioned Mike Behe about, for example, ideas about the histocompatibility complex in the immune system in humans. Could that have evolved from other things? Behe said there's no evidence that this really evolved. And so Eric just piled up this, the 53, 2-foot-high stack on the witness stand and said, what about this stuff? And Behe said it wasn't good enough. And this got into the judge's decision in not the most favorable light. But to be fair to Mike Behe, I want to say that the reason why he didn't think the evidence was good enough, and actually good enough were Eric's words, not Behe's, the reason why he thinks it wasn't good enough is because Mike defines evolution as random mutation and natural selection. And since you didn't observe that it was random mutation, and you didn't observe any natural selection, you can't say it. So he thinks it's not good enough to show this. So to be fair to him, that's what he's saying. But to be fair to everybody else, it's still crap. The second part of this is called specified complexity, and no one understands it, particularly not its proponent. And Bill Dembski thinks that you've got three ways you can get biological phenomena. For example, chance, okay, necessity, which has to do with natural processes like selection, so that would be normal science, or design. And if you can eliminate these two, then you have to accept that there is some kind of design that is not natural involved here. He hasn't got any examples. Bill is not a biologist by training, so he's really not qualified, apparently, to talk much about this, but even his ideas he's come out with haven't really swayed people. He's never published any peer-reviewed articles on this, so it's kind of tough to assess it. But the mathematicians who have worked on his sort of mathematical explanatory filter are not persuaded. And that hasn't appeared in peer-reviewed work either. So this is the problem. I always say that evolution is much more like a Monopoly game than a crapshoot, and here's why. A crapshoot is total probability, isn't it? And you know what the probability is of getting a 6 with 2 die or a 12 or whatever. But a Monopoly game has another element, and it's called history. Because when you are on a spot here, you can roll the dice, but you can only go between 2 and 12 spaces. You can't go 36 or 1, or you can't go back or whatever, because that's part of the game. These are the rules of the game. That's the probabilistic part. But where you are next depends on where you've just been. And you accumulate that stuff through time. You know, like how your roommate gets like 4 houses on Boardwalk and then you land on it and you're wiped out? That's the historical part of this. And so you can't really divorce, you can't talk about evolution as if it were all a question of chance events. It's not ever a question of a tornado going through a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 707, which was the typical metaphor for years and years. It's not like that, because there would have been a structure before that that would have experienced something and then taken what it has and then moved to something else. And that's really what's going on with this. Now, why is this a question that's important for evolution? Because microevolution, change in populations, is not difficult for intelligent design folks or other creationists. They just see it as noise in the system. It's just variation. Immunology is just noise in the system. That's why, for creationists, it's fine to put a baboon heart into a human baby, because it's just variation. It might work, it might not work. We think there's 20 million years of evolution separating those species, and that's why you have immune reactions. But they don't buy that. Macroevolution, what I just talked about, and what Darwin was talking about, the great changes through time, the great tree of life, that's harder for them. They don't want to see that. They don't admit a single instance of this, as far as I can tell. Instead, they say that complex pastures can evolve naturally. Things like the giraffe's ready mirabile and the whole system it uses so that it doesn't blow its brains out every time it puts its head down or raises it up. These are the kinds of things they're talking about. Interestingly enough, Mike Behe, who invents this concept and writes the biochemical part for the creationist textbook of Pandas and People, which was at issue in the Dover trial, does not think you can apply irreducible complexity above the molecular level. But clearly his co-authors disagree. They're talking about the whole giraffe, not a giraffe molecule. So this is the text that was intended for high schools, that was developed by these intelligent design people, and this is the one that was pushed in Dover, Pennsylvania. This is its new version. We call it Explode Evolution. And if you want to read reviews of this, go to the NCSE website. There's plenty of that. These are actual pictures. I want to talk a little bit about the testimony that I did in the trial, because this is the kind of diagram that we're faced with in Of Pandas and People, which was going to be put in front of our students. This is apparently somebody's bathroom tile wall on which some clever masking tape has been put. And this is supposed to represent and this is actually their caption and their picture. Now, no one would represent anything that we know in nature anywhere near. There's no lines connecting anything. There's no time. There's no anything like that. Okay. And here's the Cambrian explosion. Whoa! That was easy. But all the stuff that was down here before, there's no evidence. There's no linking of this. And to show you what's going on here, Pandas was produced in 1989, its first edition. In that same year, here's a more recent article by Derek Briggs and Richard Forty, and they are showing the circles for what was known in these times. You can see it's a lot more complex than this, and the relationships of these things is known from much farther back than that. And here it's, for example, is a diagram that Brian made, our student here, on what's typically called the fish-amphibian transition, which the creationists say can't take place. This is the pandas idea of why you can't get from a fishy type thing to a walking on land type thing. They even draw it pointing in different directions. Wow. So what Brian did, which I was very clever, is he put actual photos of the things. You can see what the specimens look like, really. And then he colored these things to show which parts correspond to each other, a concept that we call homology, which Pandas does a lot to pretend doesn't exist. And here we have the animals moving up in sequence in this way. So these things are far more useful in demonstrating what's really going on in evolution than the kind of diagrams that pandas have. Whales, we know so much about the evolution of whales and all the different characteristics that come up, including the fact that in some whales there is a little tiny hip girdle and a hind limb that still has the little hooky thing and the double pulley here in the ankle that is common to all artiodactyls, or the even-toed hoofed mammals, which are most of the hoofed mammals of today. So there's lots of things out there that are showing us these major evolutionary changes piece by piece. Homology also becomes a difficult question for them because they want to say that the marsupial wolf really could be related to the other wolf, and it really is just a choice, really, whether it's like a lifestyle choice, actually, whether you group the wolf with a marsupial wolf or you group the wolf with the dog. But actually our student Drew Lee went through a lot of these things and many more things behind that to show that if you actually start looking at the difference between the Tasmanian wolf and North American wolf, they are tremendous, but the wolf corresponds in all particulars to the dog, whereas this guy is a possum, essentially. So I want to point out that this kind of intelligent design is really different from what Darwin understood. In his day, he read William Paley, extremely important influence on him, who said, nature is so complex, its relationships are so complex, the different working parts of organisms, their supreme adaptation to their environment, that just like a beautifully crafted watch implies there's a watchmaker, those parts couldn't have assembled themselves at random in the same way. Looking at such beautifully crafted organisms, we must assume this. Darwin found this very convincing. Certainly the rhetoric was so convincing that he used it as a foundation of his argument in The Origin of Species, where he said, look at artificial selection and how much change breeders can do in a short time. Give nature that when the alternative is death, and we should be able to get this. And so he actually used Paley's argument to found his own thing here. A lot of people think that ID is just evolution with God in it. It's not true. It's actually not true, because this again is the idea that with theistic evolution, basically the universe runs and God's behind it. But here, intelligent design says that the creator has to come and interfere at some point to fix things that were not very well set up. And we would call this a science stopper, because you can't study miracles. And that's really the reason why we can't do this in our classrooms from a fundamental philosophical basis. Whether this is theologically good or not, I don't know. But here are some things about intelligent design that take it out of the realm of science, and Judge Jones in the Dover trial understood this. He even understood the question about peer review, which we absolutely need. Peer review doesn't make stuff right. It just means it's been looked at, and that one hopes that there is some science going on. These are really important things to tell your students. Just because you have a white lab coat doesn't mean you're a scientist, essentially. And this is what we do. This is what we do. naturalism is an important concept. And the difference here is between philosophical naturalism, which is atheism in the sense that it says the material world is all there is, versus methodological naturalism, which is what scientists do every day. They say, no matter what else might be out there, we can only work, and we're only working in science on what all of us can see, test, observe, and detect. And that's why Hindus, Muslims, Catholics, Jews, everybody from all over the world can sit down at the same lab bench. That makes the difference. But these guys don't want to say that, because if they do, they're lost. So who could the intelligent design creator be? The ID folks are very coy about this in public because they don't want to tell you. But in fact, that's what they think. And when they think they're in front of a sympathetic audience who's on their side, they're very forthright about saying, for example, as Bill Dembski does, that intelligent design is the logos of John, or what is logos of John made for? I don't know, Glenn or Jeannie knows the exact wording, but like they're very upfront about this. This is what should worry you about intelligent design, because we don't know whose Christian and theistic convictions are supposed to be implanted in American institutions. But this is from their mission statement. So it could be anybody's. Really. We just don't know. They say they'll decide this after they get rid of materialism. Okay, fine. But they're going to have a long time doing that. I'm not a theologian. I don't play one on TV. I don't know what it takes to be a theologian. But the theologians I talk to think that you got some problems here. And your students may worry about this, because my students have talked to me about these problems. And this is a problem if you think that the creator is perfect and that the works are perfect, which many people do. This is a problem for people that don't think there's divine intervention in ordinary processes, which is pretty much mainstream. Can science test religious ideas? I don't know. I'm not sure I'd like to go over the Noah's Ark story in a third grade classroom and have to go through the biology of that. Here is the problem of theodicy, of good and evil, and why there is evil in the world and what happens. The Discovery Institute folks haven't worked this out yet, but they say they're working on it, and that worries me. And this question comes up all the time. So the Discovery Institute folks don't like to play with these concepts, but they can't deny that they have these implications for anybody who chooses to supplant naturalistic explanations in science with things like this. So I'm not even going to deal with Phil Johnson. And one of our students in our evolution class did this cartoon, so I feel obliged to put it up. But you know, the more you start thinking about the problems in the world, the fig wasps, just these things that horrified Darwin, you know, the more you realize you don't want to mix this up with the business of science. And so what the judge decided is what we asked him to decide, that there was a religious purpose, that ID is not science, and these words are important according to the scientific community. That was his judgment. Judges shouldn't decide what science is and what science isn't, but they should, like any other sensible person, and he did, understand what the scientific community accepts in terms of how things are done and what is accepted as understanding. And that's exactly what he decided. And he also said this, which is often overlooked, but it was an extremely important part of his decision that we asked him to do. You should not be dealing with bogus criticisms of evolution. We can talk about how, as creation biology from 1983, a textbook, morphed through its drafts, and then once we had the Edwards versus Aguilar decision that creation science is not science, suddenly the word creationism went out of the textbook and the word intelligent design went in. So if this was our smoking gun, that intelligent design actually is the next iteration of standard creationism in scientific, so-called scientific creationism. So we were happy about this. Some people were not happy about that, but they didn't look where the judge came from. And by the way, the judge went to Dickinson College, and this is why we need liberal arts institutions. To make no mistake, the last bastion in this country to go should be liberal arts institutions, because that's how you ensure stuff like this. So this is the last paragraph of The Origin of Species. In the second edition, Darwin added the words by a creator. This is the last paragraph. There is evolve, the last word of it. This is what he thinks is the best way to end his book. And this is, actually it's a t-shirt from NCSE, maybe still available, I don't know, it's probably no more. But this is a great one because what he's talking about is the laws impressed on matter by the creator. The production and extinction of past inhabitants should have been due to secondary causes, by which he means natural things that scientists can find out. And that's really what Darwin is giving us. It's what intelligent design folks are trying to take away or confuse, which is why we ought to be vigilant about this. I want you to do that. If you don't already, I know many of you are, and thank you for listening.
This is a question based on the earlier presentation. I'm just wondering what institutions today have the honor of being custodians of either Wallace's or Darwin's collections?
The answer would be that they are scattered. The Natural History Museum in London has a good number of them. One thing I've just found that's also quite interesting is that Darwin's library is actually all over the place. Some is at Cambridge, some is at the museum, some is at other places, and Keith would know better than anyone. But when you try to find out exactly what is in Darwin's library, there is no listing. So, for example, and he, as Keith mentioned, sent out his collections to a lot of different people to study. And he picked the people, not on how great their reputation was, but on how fast they would publish, as Keith mentioned, because he did not want his collections sitting around unstudied. So that was why they got fast results on it.
Aren't there some of the finches at the Cal Academy?
Oh, the Cal Academy has about a lot of finches. We here at Berkeley, in the Museum of Vertebrate Zoology, have a bunch of Galapagos birds and about 24 tortoise shells and other parts, for example, and mockingbirds and things like that. The Cal Academy, it's an interesting thing. In 1905, they sent out an expedition to the Galapagos to try to collect more stuff from there. The expedition was, in fact, on the Galapagos Islands when the San Francisco earthquake hit. The Cal Academy was at that point downtown. All of its collections were destroyed. The guys on the Galapagos got wind of this and realized that what they were collecting was the future of the Academy.